Final Fantasy VI is considered by many to be one of the best Final Fantasies, and there's some good reason to this. This is a medieval steampunk world with a story full of mature, dark, and at times heartwarming themes with an expansive cast of characters. Characters like the main villain Kefka being more iconic, memorable, and even hailed as one of the best Final Fantasy characters of all time. And even though they updated all the other Final Fantasies in the Pixel Remastered version, Final Fantasy VI is still the most detailed and beautiful one of all of them. Now, I've never actually played Final Fantasy VI before, so this is a first time for me. But because of that, I don't view this game with the same nostalgic lens as a lot of other folks do. But since I see this game regularly in the top 100 and best RPG lists of all times, you might say I have some high expectations when it comes to this game. So the question is, did Final Fantasy VI meet those expectations? So finally, this is the final Final Fantasy title, where the numbers did not originally match up. Final Fantasy VI was released in Japan of April '94, and in the US, released as Final Fantasy III that following October in '94. Worldwide though, Final Fantasy VI was the number 3 best-selling game of that year. Donkey Kong Country and Street Fighter II took those number 1 and 2 spots. But remember, Final Fantasy VI, or I guess Final Fantasy III, released in the US much later, so it wasn't even able to make the top 10 in the US because of that. But in Japan, Final Fantasy VI sold over twice as much as Donkey Kong Country, selling 2.5 million units. In short, Japan ate this game up. But enough about the numbers and releases. Gameplay-wise, Final Fantasy VI uses the classic action-timed battle system, or ATB, combat system that Final Fantasy IV introduced. You have random encounters where your party can be attacked from multiple angles, you get your standard attack, magic, and sometimes job ability, but Final Fantasy VI doesn't actually have a job system per se, but each character more or less represents a different job or class. Some classic, like our dashing rogue Locke being the traditional thief role with steel, or the ninja Shadow with katanas and throwing stars. But some characters do feel more unique, like Terra going Super Saiyan. Yeah, we'll talk about her later. As expected, each character has certain weapons and armor that they can equip based on their role, making their stats go up and down respectively. But you also have 2 runic slots, which make things feel a little more customizable. Runics can protect your character from various stats elements like silence, poison, and insta-death, sure, and even further enhance your stats like strength and magic, but sometimes these runes can do things that change the way the character functions and their abilities. For example, a rune can turn your normal basic attack into the classic Dragoon ability Jump instead. Because for some reason there's no Dragoon type character in this game, which kind of surprised me given how many there are. But runes allow the character to do other things too, like dual wield weapons, dual hand weapons, or even change their abilities like turning Locke's Steel into Mug, or turning Setzer slots into Giltos. Now, while some characters like Straga the Blue Mage can have spells that are unique to them, magic is mostly learned through the Espers. Espers are basically the summons of this game. Each character can freely equip one Esper at a time, and each Esper will teach that character how to use the magic they have as you level up with them. This means basically any character in the game, with leveling, can learn any spell in the game. Some Espers also give you a stat bonus, like increased stamina or magic when you level up with them as well, which gives a slight bit of customization to the characters. But since every character can learn all the magic spells from the Espers, late game kind of becomes a little monotone in that you're just spamming the same overpowered spells over and over again, unless you're using one of the lucky few characters whose abilities are actually useful late game. Now, I won't go into each of the 14 characters and their abilities, and I will talk about some of their story elements later on in the video, but some characters do stand out as being special. Terra transforming greatly raises all her stats, becoming a powerhouse, and that feels great. Edgar and his machines I thought were really awesome. I personally love his little chainsaw animation. Edgar's twin brother Sabin, the monk, also uses these cool blitz moves, which allow Sabin to use sweet Dragon Ball style moves and perform that iconic suplex on the spirit train.
And his name is John C.
Some characters, however, just don't feel as deep or their abilities are flat out bad. Realm's sketch abilities kind of make her a Beastmaster-esque type character, but ultimately it's kind of bad. But she does become one of the stronger mages in the game, so she's got that going for her, which is nice. And Celeste can absorb magic, rendering spells useless, which is okay early on and for some bosses, but the problem here is when she uses her ability, it also absorbs your team spells, and as I mentioned with late game, when all you're doing is spamming powerful spells, her ability basically becomes a hindrance more than anything. And like Realm and Terra, she becomes another spell spammer. There's also Setzer, and he has slots, and usually I love a good RNG gambler type character, but he killed me way more than I thought he should with his Joker death, and so he had to go on the back burner. Then there is Gao, the feral child who learns how to use monster abilities. But unlike with the Blue Mage Strago, who learns abilities the traditional Blue Mage way by watching enemies use them, Gao has to leave your party in a special jungle area, and when he's gone, you're missing a party member. He then learns the abilities of the monsters that you fought while he was gone. Then you have to go again find Gao in random encounters so he can join you again. And I thought this whole system around Gao was just terrible and quite frankly not fun. He is basically the strongest character in the game though, with the deepest move pool, but his mechanics and the feral child archetype that he has is just a turnoff for me, and I didn't think the juice was worth the squeeze. I don't want you back yet. Get out of here. But with a few hidden characters in the game, you can easily ignore some of the characters that you don't like. For example, I would take the Dancing Mog over Gao any day. I mean, look at this cute water raccoon. Kupo. Raccoon? What? What? I also do want to mention that this game gives characters desperate actions. These feel like a precursor to limit breaks that we see later on in the series. When a character's health enters red or is critical, they have a chance to perform a special attack instead of their normal attack. But you basically never see these desperate actions at all in the game, unless you kind of go out of your way to get it. I think I saw one occur once maybe through my entire playthrough. Now, even though you do have 14 characters in this game, it does a pretty good job of letting you rotate out characters around. Some characters definitely get way more screen time than others and have far more significance in the story and plot. The second act of the game, where you get the band back together, is more freeform in the way you select your party, as long as you've found that character. But there are a few dungeons in the game where you put multiple parties together and conquer the dungeon by switching between the various groups you set up and solving puzzles and progressing. I thought these areas were actually really cool. Definitely a highlight of the game for me. I just kind of wish there were a few more going on. But where does this leave the game's combat system overall? It's the classic action time battle from Final Fantasy, and it's fine. The best part that 6 does is how a lot of the characters have great animations and unique actions that can make them look fun and visually interesting. I wouldn't say there's anything overall groundbreaking in Final Fantasy VI when it comes to combat. The Esper system kind of feels like it was meant to be that maybe, but it just isn't as interesting as the job system in 5. And the multi-party dungeon mechanics, again, were really good, but I just felt like there wasn't enough of them. But where the job system was the best part in 5, I think the story, characters, the overall themes, and the aesthetic of Final Fantasy VI are the best parts of Final Fantasy VI, and that's what makes it truly stand out. From the moment Final Fantasy VI starts, you can tell this is going to be heavy and foreboding, but there's a twinkle in the music, a glimmer of hope. The story starts out letting you know that the power of magic has seemingly vanished from the world. Iron and steam weapons now rule, and what little magic remains, the Empire controls and intends to use to further control the world with their powerful Magitech technology. This technology was developed by Cid, as you later discover, and is fueled by some questionable means of exploiting, enslaving, and experimenting on a powerful race of ancient beings known as Espers. You control a group in powerful Magitech suits and a girl called the Witch by her less than friendly teammates. She is one of the few people who can actually use magic these days, but she is under the Empire's control. A slave collar was placed on her by the villainous Kefka. And the handler mentions, this witch couldn't breathe unless we gave her permission. You start the massacre, descending on the people of Narsh, to take a frozen Esper recently found in their mines, and you will go through any resistance, even the dogs. And once you reach the frozen Esper, something happens. The Esper reacts to this witch, or something in her. The Esper breaks her free of her slave collar, and when she wakes up, days later, she has classic JRPG amnesia. She only remembers the atrocities that she's done under the title of Witch for the Emperor. But with her now freed, thanks to the roguelock bringing her to safety with the help of some Mogs, Kupo, this girl named Terra gives this dark world a glimmer of hope. And this is one of the key themes of Final Fantasy VI, having hope in the darkness. This setup does a great job of getting you into the world and letting you know the world is a bit destitute, but now there's hope. A rare and powerful magic user, Terra, has been freed from her shackles, and she's now in the care of the rebels, who wish to oppose this evil empire. But the Emperor's jester Kefka is after his lost toy Terra, and in pursuit of her now. And while this setup is great and the action does continue on in the game at various points, it does go through peaks and valleys for sure. For example, when you get your first big party split up, some parts feel a little middling, and some parts of the game you can kind of begin to wonder, what are we doing here again? Now this is where I'm going to get into some spoilers, so consider this your big spoiler warning. If you have a desire to play this game at all, probably advise you go in raw if you can. As like I said, this is almost 2 games in one. The first part of this game is about Terra finding her power, the power of the Espers. Oh, okay. That's normal. And with the help of her new friends and allies, learning how to wield this power to stop the evil empire and put an end to the man who enslaved her, named Kefka. Kefka, the iconic clown with his twisted laugh, who believes life is meaningless and there is no point to living, and only believes in destruction and power. Kefla believes these twisted ideals so much that he even turns on his own empire, killing his emperor to achieve his narcissistic goals. And Terra, our glimmer of hope, and her now friends and allies, who have also felt the wrath of the Empire and Kefka firsthand in their own way, all join Terra and aid her in the fight to throw everything on the line to try to stop Kefka. But this group, this band of heroes, they fail, and the world is ruined and crumbles. Kefka, who believes life is meaningless, succeeds and ascends into godhood. The second half of this game picks up with Celeste, an ally and friend of Terra who joined the cause, and Celeste, like Terra, was a tool enslaved to the Empire. Celeste is barely alive years later, being nursed back to health by Cid, the very man who created the means to torture Espers and extract their magical power, allowing Kefla to rise to power and gain godhood. Cid, the man now riddled with guilt in a decaying world, ruled by a clown. Celeste feels so lost in despair that she even tries to do the taboo and take her own life. But again, a glimmer of hope, this time in the form of a bandana of a loved one, and this brings light to the darkness Celeste is in, and hope strikes once again. The second half of the game, Celeste actually feels like the main character. She travels this broken world, finding her lost allies, getting the band back together, all of whom are dealing with loss, despair, and depression in their own ways. You even find Terra, who is now helping take care of orphan kids, but has lost her will to fight, unless a fat fiend wanders in and tries to attack the kiddos. But Terra can't imagine leaving these kids. It isn't until a much later meeting with her, where you gather some more old friends, still broken, but recovering, where Terra realizes that if she doesn't act, these kids won't have a future. And through these kids, Terra learns to love the world and regains her resolve to try and build a better world for the children. This in turn levels up her Esper powers, and she ends up going Super Saiyan 2. I won't get into each character, but seeing how each character is dealing with their depression, how eventually they become inspired again and overcome it in their various different ways, it's cool to see, and you're bound to find someone that you connect with at some level. They all find that one thing they love most in the world and want to fight for it, so much so that they shouted at the top of the world before the final battle. It's a great, classic, and slightly cheesy trope, but it's a damn good one. I don't want to do a play-by-play because we'll be here forever, but I do want to highlight some moments in the story and other elements that I really liked, and some that I felt fell maybe a little flat. One of the main things, I really like how evil Kefla was through his actions. Sure, he enslaved Terra, which gives some form of emotional connection to him, but how he has Terra kill the folks of Narsh, he tries and fails to burn down the Castle Figaro, how he poisons the water of Cyan's castle, killing everyone within it, killing General Leo, how he kills the Espers, and not just the Espers, but the Esper kids as well, to take their power, how he kills his own emperor. This man has quite a rap sheet going on, and he parallels a lot to the Joker from Batman in his chaotic way of thinking, how life is just a joke and he just wants to watch the world burn. And how he ends up actually winning halfway through the game is great and a nice little twist. I see why he ranks so high in the best villain department. The city of Zozo is a seedy, grungy, metropolitan atmosphere, which very much feels like a precursor to Midgar in Final Fantasy VII, as well as places like Narsh, the Empire itself, and the twisted metal garbage pile of the floating continent. They all give a unique identity to this game, which differs greatly from the Final Fantasies that came before it, as they were more traditional castles and towns. Sure, this style is replicated a lot in the future of the Final Fantasy franchise, but Final Fantasy VI was the first one that kind of did this, so I just wanted to give it some flowers here. Terra's past with the story of her parents, how they met, how Terra is half Esper and half human herself. Everything around the Espers and their history and lore was actually pretty good. It is pretty sad that they end up being ultimately genocided by the Emperor. It's pretty fucked up, but it really does add a nice layer to the story. I also liked how they really went hard on some of the darker themes in the game, especially after the team lost to Kefka. That was all good and well done, I felt. I think I'll try to do a separate video at some point where I rank characters and how I like them and dive into them a little deeper. If you like that idea, hit the buttons, comment, let me know. It'll take some time, but, you know, help a guy out in his little baby channel. But of the characters, I really liked Edgar and Sabin. The story of them deciding who will be king based on a coin flip and how one is a machinist prince and the other is basically trying to be Goku. Just really loved him. I also like Setzer and his airship stories and the story behind his airships. It is a shame that his ship, the Blackjack, was a victim of, but casualties happen sometimes. I do sort of wish you got to play some of the casino games with the group overall, maybe even see some banter and bonding between the cast. Who knows, maybe we'll see that in a remake. I also liked how Mog was a playable character. Not really much else to add there, Kupo. Oh, and Shadow's dog Interceptor, I liked him too. He doesn't really do much, but I like him. Now moving on to things I don't like. This first one is kind of more of a good and bad thing, but there is a lot of missable things in this game. Items, enemies, but there's a good amount of cutscenes as well. I was sort of aware of that going in, which is why I found a spoiler-free guide to use in my playthrough. I usually hate playing games with guides that way, but I would probably recommend it if you want a fuller experience. Combat is not bad, but it is weaker in this game. The end does become a spam powerful spell fest with Celeste, Terra, and Realm, or whichever mage dominates your fancy. I guess it just lacks a bit of depth. You could argue most Final Fantasies do fall into this trap as well, but I feel like it stands out a little bit more here for some reason. Maybe it's because you hit the peak earlier or something, or maybe I'm just kind of grasping for things to ding the game on here. I also do want to call out one fight specifically that was kind of interesting, even though I am hating on the combat a little bit here. There was a fight where I fought Mage Master, and I fought him maybe a little bit before I should have, as my team didn't have re-raise, and I couldn't survive if I beat him because he casts Ultima. So because of this, I had to defeat him in a very unique way. I had to completely drain him of his MP, which that was pretty interesting. Haven't had to really do anything like that in a Final Fantasy that I can think of offhand right now, so just wanted to call out this interesting battle. Another thing that kind of irked me was some characters have their time in the sun and then they're sort of forgotten about story-wise, or they just stop contributing. You can almost forget they're there sometimes if you aren't actively using them a lot. Some get a lot of story time though, and a lot of side quests, and some of them I feel like they just didn't need to be in the story or game at all. Cyan kind of stands out to me here, and it's weird because I do like the stories he has, and I like his whole old man samurai vibe, but he's pretty terrible in combat overall, and I do kind of feel like he was unnecessary. I feel other characters could have just taken his story elements and beats and fleshed them out a bit better. For example, Kefka could have poisoned the water, killing innocent people of Edgar and Sabin's Castle Figaro instead. This would have been a good way to show Kefka getting revenge for them helping Terra and give the twins a little more skin in the game. Cyan also has the whole storyline with his lost family and the guilt plot with the Shadow Train, and then later on in the dream sequence as well. I feel like these could have been done with Locke instead. Use Rachel as the wife stand-in, and maybe even add a new lost child that Rachel and Locke had together, and they could be stand-in for Cyan's family. I personally think this would have added a much greater level to Locke that would have only added more to his Phoenix storyline, although it would have had to have been tweaked a little bit. The villain Ultros also just didn't work for me. I understand they were trying to get that Gilgamesh-like silly reoccurring villain thing going on, and while I appreciate and tend to enjoy these types of characters, something about Ultros and this goofy purple squid just didn't land with me, and I didn't enjoy him that much. And admittedly, some of these are more personal nitpicks. I wouldn't say any of these made me dislike the game or even hate the game. Far from it. But there is one thing, well, one person and mechanics around them that I dislike the most, and that's Gao. I did touch on this before in the combat section, and I won't try to repeat myself too much, but I just did not like his mechanics of learning monster moves. And as a character, the wild feral child thing, mostly speaking in grunts and simple words, I'm just not a fan of that style. He doesn't really contribute to the story much at all either. He does get a touching, funny moment kind of later on in the game, but that still didn't redeem him at all for me. Sure, he can be the strongest party member in the game if trained and invested in, but his mechanics, overall lack of being involved in the story, even though he is with you longer than some of the other party members, I just didn't care for him. But to start wrapping this thing up, Final Fantasy VI really is an amazing game, dare say a legendary one. It's got tons of great characters, touching and deep story elements, and an amazing visual style. Did I have nitpicks like Gao? Sure, but he doesn't bring my opinion of the game down in any way. The combat might be safe and gets a little flat near the end, but again, I don't think it hurts the game or ruins it in any way. This game also brings some style decisions and choices that carry on later into the franchise, and even though Final Fantasies 1 through 5 had some good villains sprinkled in there, Kefka does tower above them. So I asked a question to start, can Final Fantasy VI live up to its reputation that all of the nostalgic lovers say about this game? And I have to admit that, yeah, it really does live up to a lot of those high praises that it gets and deserves. So the answer is yes, it did live up to my expectations. It kind of exceeded them a little bit, to be honest. Future Eggplant here. I look like shit. There's a dog here now, but there's an additional thing I wanted to call out about this game. This game has some banging music. It's got some great soundtracks sprinkled within. The battle theme in this game, it's really great. Just a lot of good songs here. Realized I didn't mention the music at all, so just wanted to insert this in here. Rav, anything to say to the people? Good talk. And I suppose Final Fantasy VI is the perfect end for the pixel generation of games. It ends with a baby being born, signifying the start of a new generation in the game and a new era. As mentioned, Final Fantasy VI was released in '94 in Japan, and the PlayStation 1 released the same year, kicking off the 3D era. And while Final Fantasy was doing almost yearly releases for Final Fantasies 1 through 6, at least in Japan anyways, the US was kind of all over the place with skipping certain numbers and them coming out way later, but in Japan, it was almost yearly releases. But the next Final Fantasy VII, was a few years away and didn't come out until '97. And that Final Fantasy would not just be the one where the numbers finally unite worldwide, this Final Fantasy would be the one to kick off the new era, the 3D era. And don't worry, my look back review of 7 will be coming just maybe a little later on. I have a couple other things I want to work on and play first, but if you like or love Final Fantasy VI, let me know. Shout out who your favorite character is. Maybe it'll influence my tier list decision when I do that. Also, should I do a ranking of Final Fantasy 1 through 6 now, and then add the other ones on later as they come? Leave a comment, let me know. Check out my other videos, and I'll try to see you soon. Later, nerds.